Welcome to Ignite Your Power series, Women's Leadership and Self-Deception. My name is Margaret Graziano, and with me here today, we have Kisha Wynter and Jeannine Rashidi. And I think I'm sharing my screen, but I don't see it. You see the deck? Okay, great. All right, so let's. Okay, so here are the three presenters today. And I'm going to start with culture. Given everything Keen Alignment does is about organizational culture, we want to start with the culture quadrant. Most of us want to work for a high-performing company that has its eye on what's going on with its people. And when organizations have their eye on what's going on with people, they are always improving. They're looking at, questioning, seeking answers, and super curious about what the human experience in their company is. And when they do that, they demonstrate high support for the human experience to match the high challenge. And we all know there's been extreme challenge happening in every organization for the last several years, and it looks like that's the game plan going forward. So what we're looking at is high support, high challenge. And in the absence of that, what happens is we have fear, self-protection, manipulation, avoidance, self-interest. And I don't care how good of a human you are, if you work in an organization where you feel you need to protect or you need to make sure you're okay, that means you're not operating at your highest level. And from last week's session, and for those of you who weren't there, you can get a recording by just putting in the chat box that you would like Nicole to send you a recording of last week's section. We talked about the 7 levels and about that people really need to be in the level of courage and belief and above to be as high performing as they can be. So let's go to the next area. So this is a survey that we use with organizations that are curious about what the human experience is. The first step is they give a sample population, maybe 10 to 20% of the population in a variety of roles, from boots on the floor or entry level right up into the executive level at all tenures of the organization. And they ask them about 50 questions about what kind of culture do you want to work in? And 90% and above organizations report in that their employee population, whether they're, like I said, entry level or all the way up to senior level, they want a high achieving environment. This is the blue space on the chart. High achievement. They want to get baskets in the hoop, get field goals, get things done, achieve, produce results. Everybody wants to work for a winning team. They also want a culture where people can feel that they can rise to their highest and best self inside the company, that they don't have to go outside the company to feel like they're contributing, that they get to achieve their personal goals, their personal objectives, and their growth with the organization. We call that self-actualization. And then humanistic. In this particular example I'm showing, this company rated humanistic a large percentage above achievement. They want to feel like people care about them. They know who they are. They know what their experience is. This is where inclusivity, diversity, gender equity takes place in this humanistic portion of this scale. And then affiliative, which is collaborative, working together, bringing several different people with several different perspectives together to solve problems. What they don't want is this aggressive, defensive, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get things done, no matter who I step over, which is oppositional, power tripping, over competitive perfectionism. And we'll talk about all of this later when we get to blind spots. So that's why I'm giving you this information up front. The
Hey,
other
Mike,
thing.
real quick, you're in presenter mode. If we could just change that, then I think our viewers can see the slides better.
Oh, for goodness sakes. So I don't know how to do that. Can Elise do that? Elise, can you do that? Are you with us? Katie has something to say. Maybe she's going to tell me how to do that.
Maggie, that's something you have to do on your end. You have to reshare your screen.
All right, so stop sharing and then reshare.
Mhm.
And
See if there's any other options there that show the slide on it.
PowerPoint. I'm sharing my PowerPoint. You want me just to share my
The slideshow. You could put
Pardon
it in slideshow mode. If you put it in slideshow mode, it should be able to.
No, it
that
is in
should be-
slideshow mode on the PowerPoint. Does that change it?
Well, you have to share your screen again. We no longer can see your screen.
Does that change it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, it was on the wrong desktop, and last week I didn't have two desktops. So, all right, so there we are. They also don't want an avoidance culture, which is where we get into this cordial hypocrisy, shaking our head and saying yes when we really mean no. This dependent, codependent, where instead of empowering people, we're doing things for people or making excuses for people or stepping over poor behavior, or conventional. We just do what we're told and nothing else. I would replace conventional with transactional, or an environment where people seek approval. I'm just going to do what you want me to do so you like me, so you think that I'm okay. So this is what people are saying they don't want. However, 2 weeks later, when we give them the second assessment, what they tell us, and this isn't just one or two organizations, this is globally, that they have a very low ideal culture, which is the constructive behaviors, achievement, self-actualization, which, by the way, with achievement comes accountability for behavior and results, self-actualization, where people feel like they can grow their highest and best self, low humanistic and low affiliative. But they have high red, which is aggressive defensive. Again, that's perfectionism, competitiveness, powering up over people, and opposition. And they also have high cordial hypocrisy, which is avoiding an avoidant culture, not saying the things we want to say. Dependent, we have to be told, we need to be followed up, we need to be invited or asked. Or conventional, we just stay in between the lines, or approval, where it's all about fitting in and belonging with the group and not making any waves. So this is how culture works. There's what people say they want. That's the ideal culture, or the assumptions, or the espoused values. And then there's the mission and philosophy, and who we say we are and who we say we want to be, and what we say is the ultimate intent of our organization. And then there's reality, which is the structures, how we work, how we get work done with each other, the systems, how we have meetings, how we train people, how the jobs, what's the level of authority and responsibility and influence in each of the jobs, and then the skills and the qualities and the behaviors we bring to the table at an individual level, at a group level, and at a system-wide level. And so I would say we've given about 500 of these assessments, and we have not had one that didn't look like this. To the degree of the numbers vary, but the color coding is what I really want you to see. Most organizations believe they have one thing going on, and when they ask people, they find they have another thing going on. And so understanding that culture is the experience of people, how they interact, how they work together, their beliefs, their feelings, their moods, their behavior, their attitudes. Then we'll go into what an intentional, healthy, and high performance organizational culture has is first and foremost humanistic. We get people, we understand people for better and worse, because everybody has strengths and everybody has weaknesses, and there are no victims that are not in control. I mean, if life is really that bad at the company, then probably you would leave. Affiliative, which is we're bringing people in from all levels of the organization. We're collaborating, we're connecting, we're asking for their feedback, and we're actually applying not everything we learn, but a lot of what we learn. And then self-actualization, which I've talked about, and achievement, which is really producing. So now we're going to go into what that looks like in real life as far as the humanistic side. People need to feel seen at work, that what they want is important, that what they're contributing is recognized and appreciated. They need to feel like they're part of the team for being themselves, not for fitting into an environment or going along with everybody that's crashing into the side of the mountain. They need to feel accepted for who they are and appreciated, loved, and heard, which is why it's so important to do things like data collection and surveys. So people know that you actually care about what they have to say. I was on a call this week and the CEO said, well, in my opinion, we have a great culture. When I talked to the people who reported to the CEO, they said, in our opinion, we don't. We have the old company culture of what was started long before we got here. And then we have all these new people from different backgrounds, different companies, different genders, different ages, different races, different nationalities. And it's not inclusive. It's like the old guys club. And so we really need to ask people what they think and how they think we could make a difference so that we can actually step into humanistic, affiliative self-actualization and achievement. So we're going to get into blind spots, and Kisha's going to start here about personal blind spots.
And so we all have blind spots in terms of how we work. And let's go on to the next slide. And so my next few slides will be talking about those personal blind spots that we have that gets in the way of how we advance professionally. There's going to be the blind spot that we have internally, and then there are blind spots that we have externally to us. Next slide, please. So blind spots are all about what we know that we know, right? And then there's another category of blind spot, what we know we don't know. So all that is, and then the third piece is where the majority, you see it in blue here, is what we don't know that we don't know, right? So that's the very definition of a blind spot, is what we don't know what we don't know. And so this conversation is about bringing into your vision those blind spots.
Actually,
Maj, you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I took myself off camera. So in the realm of what we don't know, the fact is we don't know it. It is not in our mind's awareness. It's not in our perspective. It's nowhere available to us. And in the world that we're living in right now, the National Science Institute says that the average human being has between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts a day. 12 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Problem is, not only is that too much for a brain to handle, but 85% of those thoughts are negative and repetitive. 85% are negative and repetitive. So in the thoughts about ourselves, about what doesn't work about ourselves, we have this whole wall of thought about who we think we are and who we don't think we are, and what we think is in our way, and what we think about other people. And it's not just like over here or over here or over here. It's everywhere. It stacks up like a wall of bricks, and it shades our perspective, our opinions, our beliefs, and it even shades what we can see and what we can't see. Think about a car accident. There's 4 witnesses, each from a different corner of a 4-way stop. Every witness will give you a different perspective of that car accident. And the drivers, those drivers that crashed into each other, they have different perspectives. So in an average car accident, simple car accident, 4-way stop, you've got 6 different perspectives. So imagine what's going on at work with everybody's wall of thought, everybody's perspective, gender bias, race bias, nationality, sexuality bias. It's everywhere. And we don't really talk about it because mostly we want to be nice and we want to fit in and we don't want to stir the pot and we don't want to cause trouble. So we deal with all of those biases and all of those beliefs, and we take it inside, and then it impacts us negatively. So back to Kisha.
And so in light of those barriers or those blind spots, I want to break it down even further in terms of, I would say about 80 to 90% of the people on this call, you want to advance professionally, right? And so when we talk about women in leadership, which is what I focus on, there are two barriers to women advancing professionally. And those are your internal glass ceiling. I would refer to those as your own internal limiting beliefs. And we're going to talk more about that, as well as what's not internal to us, but is external. There are external barriers as well. So going on to the next slide. Self-doubt is what I'm going to call today your internal glass ceiling. What is self-doubt, first of all? Self-doubt is this nagging, shaming, criticizing voice that shows up when you're stepping outside of your comfort zone, when you're doing new things, when you're playing big. And so I tell people all the time, when self-doubt comes, it's not a time to be afraid, but it is a time to celebrate, ironically, because what you're doing is that you're pushing yourself to do new things. And if you're resting on your laurels, you're not going to feel this sense of discomfort. But discomfort means that you're growing. And so how does self-doubt show up? It shows up in many forms. Here are three that we'll talk about. You're very aware of the imposter syndrome, which really is this concept that no matter how good you are, you feel like you're an imposter, and it usually shows up in people that are high achievers. If you have ever struggled with imposter syndrome and you know you're a high achiever, I want you to type in the chat. I want to see which one of these three actually. Is it imposter syndrome? Is it perfectionism? And perfectionism can be very deceptive because people conflate or don't understand that there's a difference between perfectionism and excellence. Perfectionism is you're trying to prove your worth through your work. Excellence is actually having a high standard. So having excellence is healthy. Perfectionism is not. And then the expert one is also deceiving because obviously in our profession, we get paid for our expertise. But a lot of times we hide behind data or we hide behind expertise instead of actually sharing our perspective. And the reality is in a lot of situations, a lot of meetings, it's moving through this idea of just sharing your expertise and actually share your perspective, because your perspective is a little bit riskier, but it's also informed by your expertise. So I see Tanya, a few people, thanks for typing in the chat, started typing which ones resonated with you. I saw, so a lot of Lane GE says, or Lange said imposter syndrome. Tanya, Candace said perfectionism, and Loretta, all three. Thank you for your honesty. So
Kisha, I want to interject that when we look at a culture that's not healthy, often that expert who's opposing others or powering up over others, or the perfectionism shows up as not giving other people space. The imposter syndrome shows up on the right side of the circumflex, which is the need for approval, being dependent, waiting, avoiding. And so what all of our personal behaviors, we can stack them up. And when you have several people or hundreds of people in an organization bringing in their self-doubt, that's actually the fundamental reason why you have dysfunction. Because even people who are, let's say, bullies on the aggressive defensive side, they have self-doubt, and that's why they're being a bully.
And it shows up in so many different ways. So absolutely. So we'll be touching that a little bit more towards as we continue. So here are some common self-doubt behaviors. Go back a bit.
Yeah, I know. It's having a mind of its own today.
So a common self-doubt statements. If any of these resonate with you, as a matter of fact, I would love for you to type in the chat which one of these really jump out at you, because it shows up in many different ways. You see highlighted in red, it's some sort of variation of not being enough. So I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough. What could it be? I don't have enough expertise or experience, right? Especially when you're newer in your career, you think, oh boy. On the flip side of that, you may think I have too much. So it shows up, I'm too young, or I'm too old. You're never like the right level of experience or the right age for anything. You may think you have no value to add. What if I'm wrong? What if everyone finds out I'm a fake? Or if you're an immigrant or English is not your first language, you may think your accent is too thick. All these different statements shows up as well. Alicia says, I don't speak professional enough. So there you go. What if I'm wrong? Berenice says, what if I'm wrong? At times. Absolutely. So love these. And I'm not going to read all of them, but if you share, you're showing to everyone that they are not the only ones that have these limiting beliefs of the negative self-talk. And Maji said it before, there are like 60,000, what was the number again, of negative self-talk that shows up in our brain every single day. And so we're going to talk about how we're going to heal and combat these negative statements. But Maji referred to earlier on, right? There's one aspect of it, which is the shrinking aspect of self-doubt. But then there's the idea of being too expansive and blowing up, right? So this manning up, using manipulation. Then there is the suppressing ideas and all of that. Maji, I know you want to jump in on this and
Yeah.
say.
So awareness is, getting an insight. Oh, I have self-limiting beliefs. Power and igniting your power. And this is one of our webinar series for our retreat that we're having in January, Ignite Your Power for Women Only. It is very deep in exposing limiting beliefs, but more than that, what are the behaviors that result? How do we act when we're feeling not enough, or like what we want to say doesn't matter? So manning up is like acting like a guy, like that guy gets a lot at work. I'm going to go in and be somebody I'm not. Now I'm going to start acting like him, or holding yourself back. I had a woman once from PricewaterhouseCoopers, this senior executive in their region. And she said in their board meetings, she doesn't say a word. She doesn't say a word because she's certain she'll screw something up. And so she's not really self-actualizing on her job at all. And she says she experiences a ton of stress from holding back, giving up altogether and saying, this place is crazy. I'm not even going to try. Second guessing yourself, using manipulation to get what you want. We've heard stories, crazy stories, where, some women will make excuses for not getting work done, but they're manipulative excuses where it brings their gender into play, and they don't understand that doesn't help the cause. You don't want to use your gender as a pawn. You want to use your internal power to be who you are and express. And the reason people have self-doubt behaviors is because they're not getting coaching. They're not really looking, they're not dwelling, they're not putting themselves in an experience where they can actually see how they behave, take responsibility for their behavior, and come out the other side with new behaviors, which Kisha will talk about. So collusion, gossip. When in the Ignite Your Power workshop in January, we talk about immature feminine and mature feminine. Gossip, colluding at work comes from the immature feminine. We learned how to do it as little girls, and it really is pervasive in corporate America, in any organization of any size, and it is a cancer of a healthy culture. And then, I'm good with that. All right, Kisha, you're back.
And I love how you highlight feminine and masculine instead of saying women versus male, because, and I know you teach this a lot, Maji, is that there men can have feminine energy in different aspects, as well as women can have male masculine, I should say, energy. And so we want to just definitely make the distinction there. And so now we want to talk about behaviors. How do we move past self-doubt and begin to ignite that power within, right? Or ignite our internal power, which is the focus of our upcoming event in January. One of the things I say is, okay, first of all, I said it earlier, when self-doubt shows up or fear shows up in any forms, right? Because it is a form of limiting belief and fear, it's reframing it, not saying that I'm lacking something or something is wrong with me, but actually stretching, learning, and growing is happening. So don't freak out about it. Don't panic. It's because you are actually awesome. You're not resting on your laurels and doing the same thing every single day. Like some people, they don't push themselves professionally, so they never have the opportunity or create the opportunity, I should say, to be presenting in front of a large audience of people, which will bring up maybe self-doubt. Or speaking maybe not to a larger audience of people, more importantly, senior level executives. And so when you're finding yourself taking on new projects and new assignments, you're going to feel, you're human, right? You're going to feel that little tinge, but it's not overreacting to it, reframing it to realize that learning and growing is happening. And so I'm just going to lean into it. Connecting to higher values. And that's something that I would say that helped me in my career. I would consider myself an ambivert, leaning more towards the introversion side. But, how is it that somebody like me can sit here on a webinar or do keynote addresses, which I do often, and be on stage in front of hundreds of people? Not because I am a naturally outspoken person, but because I've done that internal work to connect to my higher values. What are some of my values that motivate me to get in front of a large audience of people when I would frankly rather be home reading a book, a really good book, or watching a Hallmark series by myself? That higher value is contribution and service. It's this contribution that I have that I want to see people reach and self-actualize to get to their full potential. And so that's some of the work that we do at Ignite Your Power, our event that's coming up in January, which I'll talk a little bit more about. It's bringing your understanding of what are your values that are going to be so much more powerful to you that when you learn them and lean into it, it actually makes your self-doubt and your fear become irrelevant because you become more aligned with those values and who you authentically are. So you're not buying into the messages from self-doubt and your imposter syndrome. So if that really resonates with you, I want you to type yes in the chat, because this is the kind of deep internal work that we're going to be doing at Ignite Your Power that will really cause an internal shift and a transformation in how you show up in your personal life and at work. Because how we do one thing, frankly, is how we do everything. The minute I learned to own my power and ignite my own power in my personal life, it showed up at work. And when I did it at work, it showed up at home. So we're whole human beings, right? We bring our full selves to everything that we do. And I'm a very interactive person, so I want you guys to type in the chat. What do you think? Is contribution or service, or what do you think your values that are so powerful to you that if you lean into them, it will allow you to break through that self-doubt and fear? Is it contribution? Is it service? Is it
And if
something
you don't
else?
know, that's okay, because that's why you would use a coach or come to a workshop.
And that's why
But
you're becoming
Kisha,
to Ignite
I'd
Your
like to
Power.
add something. And when you
Mhm.
said you bring your whole self, so I was talking to one of my clients, I can't remember who, but it just came to me that like we show up into a room and we have two pieces of luggage. We have the empty suitcase with all our hopes, our dreams, our values, our vision, everything we want to have in life. And experience happens, and that suitcase gets filled up. The suitcase another suitcase we have when we walk into the room is our past, our beliefs that don't serve us, our doubt, our bad experiences, something someone said, a time we gave an idea and everyone said, that's a silly idea. And so we're always juxtapositioning the life we want with the life we have. I don't care who you are, how much work you've done. I mean, I've been doing work on myself. We added it up the other day and it's 20,000 hours just personally, because I used to lead these programs at a large scale as a volunteer before I actually started my own company. But even I walk into a room as specifically with men. I did a workshop with 100 men, CEOs, in the fall. And I practiced and I knew my material, but I walked in and all of a sudden the insecure little girl was there. My values, like I forgot about them. I forgot about what my big impact is. And I'm a lot like Kisha. I want contribution and liberation. I mean, my intention for my life is people are liberated. But that went bye-bye. And what showed up was, do they like me? Do they think I'm smart enough? Do they think I'm good enough? And when that happened, man, Margaret Graziano left the room, and what showed up was an imposter, like a little girl trying to be liked by the boys on the playground. And so, I have a wonderful coach, and I immediately called the coach and said, I cannot believe what just happened. Now she walked me through, and I now have a new practice, a new habit, so that when I go, whether it's 5 people or 10 people or 50 people, but when I'm surrounded with men who, let's face it, they run most of the organizations in the world. And so they're most of the people signing my checks. I'm here to liberate the human spirit. And it's a soul to soul conversation now versus a woman speaking to a bunch of men. But I lost myself right back then and there. And I want you to know that discipline and rigor and continuing to immerse yourself in growth and development is the only way out of this conundrum is through, and to work through it. Back to you, Kisha.
And I love the vulnerability and the transparency of that story, because it shows that it's work that we have to continuously immerse ourselves in and do it. So, and this is the other reason why it's so beautiful to be in a community of other people that are doing the work and in the work. And that's also what you will get in our upcoming retreat. And so, I already talked about striving for excellence, not perfection. So I'm not going to go to that. But I love the last quote is, at the end of the day, it's just remember to believe that you belong in any room that you're in. Trust me, you're not going to be invited in a corporate room if you had not earned your spot there. And it's time to begin to own it, recognize it, and know it. Because when you begin to own it, then you begin to attract much more opportunities to you.
And the way you get invited is by making a contribution. It is by taking risks. It's not by pointing out everything everybody's doing wrong. That's not the risk I'm talking about. It's by making a contribution to make things better. Hey, I see this thing, I see this problem. Here's an idea I have. Can I run with it? The more you take initiative, the more you break out of those patterns that keep you held back, that's when people start to notice she is a contributor and I want her opinion on this. So this is just an information on Westerbeck Ranch, the place we're having, that was the place we're having a retreat. If this sounds interesting to you, if you want to spend 3 days and 3 nights in Sonoma, California, and really look at where is your mature feminine leading and where is your immature feminine getting in the way, or where have you adopted immature masculine traits that just don't serve you. And I mean, we'll talk about it in a minute, but the goal is integration. So in the retreat, we help you create your future. We put you through very experiential process where you not only create your future, then you envision it, and then you start to create a map forward to fulfill that future. And then we also spend a lot of time on day 2 looking at what's in the way. What are those beliefs? What are those behaviors? What are my saboteurs? And how do they show up? How do they thwart my effectiveness? And I don't even know what's happening because it's a blind spot. And then we look at on day 3, developing habits and routines and exercises that can help you, just like with Dr. Paul and I, the 2 suitcases, have that suitcase about the contribution I want to make lead and not my insecure self lead. I'm in my late 50s. I still have those things and I do work all the time. This is a never ending journey for me of self-development. Well, Ignite Your Power is your entree into an immersion retreat about you and how you can expand your influence. And also, I started the conversation off with We Do Culture all day, every day. We started Ignite Power because it was the women in the room who wanted to have culture be a safer place. It was the women in the room who said, we know how to get the basketballs in the hoop. We know how to get the field goals. We know how to put numbers on the board. But I think we're missing something with the people, because the feminine right hemisphere, feminine brain, that I'm mixing metaphors right now, but I'm doing it on purpose. The piece of our right hemisphere has us see the whole. We can see the interactivity between people. We can see the invisible. And it's that left hemisphere, that masculine, typically men are very good at left hemisphere, that producing of the results, the getting stuff done, the paying attention to the details and the numbers, often that's what gets heard first in organizations. So you've got left hemisphere run organizations that get really far until they start to lose really good people. When an organization operates integrated, right and left hemisphere, that's when it's high performing, healthy, and intentional. So if any of this sounds interesting to you, we're giving you, if you register by Friday, we're giving you 20% off to come to the retreat. If you don't want to attend the retreat live, we are looking at possibly bringing some people on remote as an experiment to see how effective can an integrated session work. We've done a ton of Ignite Powers remote. We've only done two live. And this program is the first step of our Culture Catalyst program, because in order to lead movement around healthy, intentional, high performance culture, you've got to be good with you. You've got to be really good with you, and you've got to be at the top of your game, because catalyzing change takes everything we have. And it takes partnership with other people who are also catalyzing change. So Ignite Power is our first in 3 immersion retreats for our Culture Catalyst program. And I just wanted to make sure you knew that. And by the way, for the men on the call, we're going to be addressing you too. I'm not saying men are not interested in culture, but women, if you're a man who has not really exercised your right hemisphere, women see sometimes what the guys can't see. So we have both men and women in our Culture Catalyst program, always in partnership.
And so what I'm going to read a couple comments, and then I'm going to hand over to Jeannine, because we will not have time to get into the systemic blind spots as well. But I love that Shanti said, my confidence comes from the impact I can create on folks I interact with. So some awareness of that impact is one of your values. So love that awareness. And Lane says it's important to let go of the stories that you gave meaning about your experiences. Lighten the load and look what is actually occurring with your contribution. Love that. These are the really great insights. And so we spent some time talking about these internal barriers. Now, it's really important to know that there are also system-wide. So there are things that we can do within ourselves. This is why we're talking about igniting our own power. And there's some responsibilities of leaders in organizations that they do need to take on to ensure that we've removed any obstacles and create equity in organizations. So men, women, people of all backgrounds can really thrive in organizations. So when you come to the workshop, you'll learn more about this. But I do want to turn over to Maji, and then so that you can turn over to Jeannine. So that we don't, so you'll have to skip over those slides so that we give Jeannine enough time to share her content.
I'm good. We're good on time. So a few external barriers, system-wide biases are giving women housework at the office. People don't do it on purpose, but I hear a lot of people say they always have me order the lunch. I'm at the same level they are. Why am I doing that? It does require having open and honest conversations. Many organizations, there's an organization, for those of you who are in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, there's an organization called How Women Lead. And their mission is to get more women in the boardroom. But the truth is, I would say 80% of the boardrooms have males in them. And they don't just want women in there because they're women, they want women in there because they bring something to the table. And so starting conversations about this is going to be really important. And male leaders, Kisha, are you sure you don't want to take this slide?
Yeah, sure. I want to be cognizant of the time. Okay, so absolutely. And, the reality is that in order for us to create a space where women and people of all backgrounds can thrive in the corporate space, we've got to be aware of beliefs, right? Remember, we talked about our own internal limiting beliefs and self-doubt. But then there's cultural and external organizational beliefs that actually get in the way of women contributing at their highest levels in organization. And the reason we're pointing out male leaders needing to be aware of the blind spots, not because we're picking on males, but the fact is men own 80% of the decision-making power, C-suite and above position in organizations. And what I know from working with male leaders is most of them do want to ensure that they're creating equity in their organization. And so when they're coaching women, and they tend to try to coach them exactly the same way that they coach the men in their organization. But where the blind spot is that those leaders may not realize when, for example, they coach a woman to own her power, right? Like igniting your power that we talked about. When she expresses herself in a very direct way, her directness can be misinterpreted not as assertiveness, but aggressiveness. And because of that misinterpretation of her owning her power, then there's a backlash that she's not liked. Maji talked about it earlier, like the little girl showed up, like, oh, will they like me? Will they like me? Because it's a part of how we were raised. And these are like things that we have to begin to shed. But we have to also create spaces and environments in our organizations where we don't perpetuate those penalties on women and which encourage us to shrink because we don't want to share the backlash, right? So again, taking those out of your blind spots. The whole idea of women being too emotional. Again, in other situations, they're looked at when a guy shows it looked at as passion. Oh, you're so passionate. But then instead of saying it's passionate or a leadership trait, all of a sudden it's flipped to too emotional. And the reality, there are times that there are women that are too emotional and that there are men that are too emotional. But let's not allow our biases to mislabel something. And so all of these things.
And part of growing as a leader, no matter what your gender is learning to express and stay grounded. I think some of the times what happens is that emotional comes out because a lot of women go to sadness. And they're like, one of my clients is retiring yesterday, and it just hit me. I'm not going to have those conversations with her anymore. And I started crying on the call, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm crying. She was a safe person to cry in front of, but I would never do that with a male leader because their stereotype is that's weak. Boys don't cry. And so we do have to do things for ourselves too that teach us how to be grounded, and we have to teach them how to be grounded. I love everything you're saying, Kisha, and I already talked about the housework and glamour work.
And you already did it, so absolutely beautiful. So 3 things male can do, because again, we say this is a partnership, and this transformation is not going to happen with women working on their own. So what are some of the things that male leaders, and even if you're not a male leader, I say leaders because frankly, everyone in an organization is a leader. You're a leader of your space. You're a leader of the work that you're doing. You're a leader of the impact that you're making. And so one of the things that you could do is challenge bias. When you hear this mismatch, instead of calling it, well, wait, let's hold up a second. When Johnny did it, you called it passionate, but when Sally did it, you said emotional. Let's ensure that we're applying consistency. So challenge the bias when you hear it, calling it out. 2, being a sponsor and an advocate. When you see someone that is doing amazing work, advocate, especially that a person reports to you in your organization, advocate for that person, give them more visibility, sponsor them for bigger roles and bigger opportunities. And the third thing that can be done is giving that person in your organization credit for her work, but not just that, take her to meetings. Allow her to present her material, the amazing work that she did. Give her that visibility, because when you give her that visibility, it opens up additional sponsors for her and additional opportunities to come to her as well. So sharing and spreading that well.
I want to add another thing. It goes into the male, calling out when things are not right. One of the things that I hear a lot of is comments made at work that are sexual innuendos, or maybe they're not outright advances, but they're old school Mad Men kind of comments. If you haven't seen the show Mad Men, watch it for all the things we should never be doing. But it happens and everybody chuckles, and often including the women chuckle. Chuckling, I don't think, is the right response. And for each of you on the webinar and those that are going to watch after, you have to look at in advance, what is your response going to be? But just like I worked with my person on what am I going to do for myself next time? Chuckling makes it seem like you're going along with it. And I've even been in trainings where a guy threw out a sexual comment, and the women in the room laughed. And one of them even took the little itty bitty comment that he made and she added so much mass to it. And afterward, I asked her about it, and she didn't even realize she did that. She said, I'm so used to being one of the boys that I'm sure I step over this stuff all of the time. And then another woman said, well, if we were to shut that down, we'd be fired. I said, really? Would you be fired? Why don't we learn ways and practice ways to shut those comments down in a way like maybe stone face, or, wow, I don't think that was actually appropriate. But if we don't say anything, if we don't see something and say something, they don't even know, they just fell in the hole. And guys, you hear the story, guys will be guys, but it's up to us to say, yeah, that doesn't work for me. Because if we allow it, even if it's just locker room talk in an office, it's still locker room talk, which doesn't belong in the office. And if you look at sports teams, there's a lot of women broadcasters that are starting to say, not appropriate. You don't get to talk to me like that. And I understand Hollywood is Hollywood, and sports teams are sports teams, but I think it takes all of us. I think it takes a village, and we have to just find out what our response is, but don't smile and snicker, because men, the masculine loves when women laugh at them. And so they just think you gave them a round of applause and that they were funny. And if you don't think it's funny, don't laugh.
Okay,
So the
go ahead.
bottom line, it's about building trust. It's about getting curious. It's about asking people, what do you think is going on here? How are we doing with gender equity? What can we do better? Men and women both, what's working about my leadership? What's not working? And even a better way to ask is, what's one thing that you want me to keep doing that I do really well? And what's one thing that you want me to stop doing that might be getting in my way? Inclusivity, don't just bring the same old to every meeting. Get people who have a different perspective from different levels in the organization, difference of opinions, and different places in the supply chain or in the production chain, so that you can actually demonstrate that you're an organization with human values. Don't just talk it, do it. And then collaboration. Don't just bring people in, but let them do work together. So Jeannine, take it away.
Thank you, Maji. So we've been talking about culture, which has to do with the relationships that we're forming. And the relationships that we're forming have everything to do with the relationships that we have with ourselves first and foremost, which means we are either bringing to the table our best self, where we have had our fundamental needs met, where we were seen, heard, loved, and accepted. But what happens when we come to the table and those needs have not been met? And these are usually needs that we hopefully had growing up, but many of us have not had. So I'd like to share with you a short story about that. So 20 plus years ago, before I started my health and wellness practice, Goodbye Tension, showing people how to alchemize these negative life experiences and giving themselves these fundamental needs, I was VP of marketing for a company that sold Visa and MasterCard service. Now, the culture there was very different 20 years ago. I was the only female in leadership in that company. I was the one being asked to go pick up the lunch, to get the coffee. When I shared my ideas, the men were having separate meetings and taking credit for those ideas, and then coming back and bringing, the agenda to me. And so when I dared to confront them about this, my boss said, "You women, you're just too emotional." So here's what happened. Now, being that I had my own issues of negative life experiences that I brought to the table, all of a sudden, I felt rejected. So now, in order to be accepted, I was willing to accept the way I was being treated as long as I could be accepted in some way. Now, yes, the other part of me felt incredibly triggered. And this is where we are operating at, the 7 levels. And I was clearly operating at that level 1, 2, and 3 of ineffectiveness, which I'll let Maji talk about.
Well, this is the 7 levels. And if you've worked with us or been on our other webinars, we use this in everything we do because all of our work is grounded in neuroscience. When that happened with Jeannine, or me standing in front of the room, or Kisha when she was working in her corporate job, we go to our lowest level of effectiveness behaviors. And it's not that we're powerless, but we relinquish our power. And we are consumed with how things occur to us, and we can't see beyond ourselves. And so it's a really good model to understand, to be in courage, engagement, innovation, and synchronicity at work. We need to be, of course, now my battery is failing. We need to be using both sides of our brain. Now, our right hemisphere, this side of our brain, although you're seeing me say left because it's reverse camera, but right hemisphere, when we're above that power and freedom line on the 7 levels, allows us to see the whole picture. It allows us to take care of the baby, cook dinner, pay bills, talk to our mother on the phone, and make sure the kids are doing their homework. That's holistic. Then we've got, it also allows us to access major aspects of our intuition. It gives us access to empathy, metaphor, and oneness. That's why right hemisphere people are drawn to culture. Right hemisphere dominant. We're all dominant in one or the other. Left hemisphere is all about structure. Believe it or not, the left hemisphere is where positivity comes from. Focus and direction, logic and analysis, sequence, focus on parts. If you've read any books on the masculine brain or the feminine brain, they will tell you that we have 95% of our brain is the same, except there's 5% that has, the men have stronger access to left, the male, and the female have stronger access to right. And as I said earlier, if we can learn to integrate these, and that's a whole workshop and much deeper we're going to get into and Ignite Your Power. But if we can learn to access these and understand, wow, I'm being really left brain right now. I'm not looking at anybody. I'm not even considering my own needs, or I'm being really right brain. I'm all fluffy and happy and crying on calls and telling my client I'm going to miss her. And I'm missing that we have to actually get something done right now. The more aware we are, the better it is for us.
So why is it important that we integrate our heart and our mind so we can come from a place of wholeness? So we talked about personal blind spots, and we also talked about blind spots with others. So when our heart and mind is not integrated, there is a split or a disconnect, and we're usually operating from one or the other. So our blind spots tend to be when those triggers show up because of the fundamental needs that have not been met. So in the story that I had shared earlier, my fundamental need to be accepted was my blind spot. It also was actually my blind spot with my boss, because had I had more of a resolved self, first of all, I never would have worked for somebody like that. So I wouldn't have walked into that place. But I also was projecting onto others the need to be accepted. So there was the expectation within that relationship. So the question is, who's in the driver's seat? Now, in that moment where I was rejected, the triggered part of me was in the driver's seat. The part of me that needed to be accepted, the projection part of me was in the driver's seat. What we want to do, and this is exactly what you're going to learn in the Ignite Your Power retreat, where you learn how to integrate the heart and the mind, is to come from a more resolved sense of self. So let's say something like that does happen where your boss says, oh, you women are too emotional. I'm not so sure we'd hear that nowadays like we did over 20 years ago. But
you hear it. You hear it. I'm sure there's people in the chat that would say, yes, I've heard it.
Right. But we want to be able to interact with that moment and not have our trigger take over We want to be able to see bigger picture, what's going on, and be able to communicate from our authentic self within our power and know that we deserve to be in that room. We deserve to be respected, so on and so forth.
So Jeannine, one of the things I want to say about Jeannine is the work that she's going to be doing in the workshop is all about the triggers. And I've been doing this kind of work for the last year because everything she talked about that happened to her in work, that's been happening with me in dating. And I know some of you single people on the call could see that, like you just give up your power because you just want things to work out. And I'm really excited to be a student during your sessions at the retreat. So the last thing that we're going to talk about is how do you have a conversation for action about inclusion, about gender biased. First and foremost, tap into your right hemisphere and set the context. What is it that you want? Do you want a healthy, high-performing, intentional culture? Notice those words come from the ideal culture and their right and left hemisphere integrated. Achievement is left hemisphere, healthy, intentional is right hemisphere. So you have to set the context for whatever conversation you're having. And then share what you're committed to and ask what their commitment is for that. Then let them know what you want to talk about. I want to talk about gender equity. I want to talk about the men in this company learning that we're carrying some, old behaviors that are no longer appropriate in the 21st century, or whatever it is that you want to talk about. Or even the women could be having old behaviors too. I mean, I just had lunch with a client that worked with me for 20 years. Her boss, a woman, totally exploited her sexuality in every business meeting. I'm talking mini skirts and low cut shirts because she had an imposter syndrome that they wouldn't listen to her unless she got them through sex appeal. And it was pervasive in the organization. All the young women coming there wanted to be like Linda. Anyway, so what's the agenda? And then listening. What do they have to say? What do they need to say to you? And are you listening truly, not from below the line, but from above the line? And if you are above the line, you'll be in a space to have a validated assessment and ask some good questions, a grounded assessment and ask questions. And then confirm that you have a mutual understanding of what you want to get done, and then you make agreements. And it's really important that if you make an agreement, you keep the agreement, and then you set follow-up stages. So for those of you that are on this call today, if you want a copy of the PDF for this, please put in the chat with your email address that you want a copy of this PDF so you can share it with other people. And also the free gift we have for you is a survey on inclusion and engagement as it pertains to how you do meetings and how you get work done. And we recommend that you give that to people and then have them score and use that as a baseline for a conversation. So last, I'm going to say it again. If you found anything interesting in this and you'd like to be with a group of women who are igniting their power, this is for people who are in leadership, see themselves as leaders who want to make a big difference in the place that you work, and you first want to elevate the leader within. This is your opportunity to get 20% off. If you're interested in the remote program, please put in the chat that you're interested in logging in remotely, and we're going to see how we can work that out. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate your attention, and we know you've got a lot going on. We've got holidays right around the corner, but you made time to be here today. So thank you so much for putting your leadership first. myself for completion. All right. Bye, everybody.